Hi and welcome to the next episode of Where Did I Go? Today we're going to be looking at creativity and how that changes when we've had children. And the reason I'm so excited about this topic is because we're consistently told that motherhood takes things away from us, our time, our freedom, our sense of self. But what we don't often hear is how it can also spark a massive creative expansion, a total cosmic realignment of who you are and what you're here to make. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to Katie McCrory, who's a brand storyteller at IKEA, but she's also a writer, about how becoming a mum didn't shrink her creative life, but blew it wide open. While on maternity leave, Katie wrote the book she'd been thinking about for years, not because she finally had the spare time, obviously, but because motherhood stripped back everything and made what really mattered impossible to ignore. The result? A creative identity that she could never put back in the box and has become so critical to her sense of self since. We talk about what happens when your world tilts on its axis and your voice, your drive and your clarity comes roaring back after motherhood. This is an episode about expansion, about finally backing yourself, and about how motherhood might just be the most creatively alive you have ever been. I am super excited for this one. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
It's, as I was just saying before we were kicking things off in earnest, it's just so nice to do an episode with a friend. Like, this is going to be a really cozy experience. We're going to get like cozy in a way I don't think I've been able to with other guests, just because we have this level of familiarity. So I am so excited for today. Thank
you. Well, an honour, and I think a testament to the kinds of friends that we bring together in our kind of, I don't want to say later lives because that makes it sound like we're kind of shuffling off somewhere, but I think as adults, right, it's so much harder in this season of our life as well with young families. And when time is so constrained, I think the people you have around you are so important in sort of helping build up the potential of who you can be, both as a parent, but also as an individual.
Yeah, definitely.
To both of us coming together in this season of our life.
Absolutely. And I think actually we could almost do a separate episode on that, like how we met and the journey of just, you know, yeah, exactly. How to make friends when you're over 35 and have zero time.
Okay, yeah. There's a book in that.
There's definitely a book in that. And it starts, I love that our story starts with basically you talking about naked winter bathing as being like the genesis of it all. So I'll leave it there, a little bit of suspense for everyone. All right, well, let's get to the really good stuff about today. I think, like, as an intro or as a start to this episode, it would be really lovely if you could share a bit about you and about your journey to motherhood and kind of what that experience was like for you emotionally, personally, creatively, and yeah, let's go from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great question because I guess the shorthand, and I can talk about it with a lot of emotional fluency now, but I think if you'd asked me in the middle of my journey to motherhood, it would, it'd be different. But it wasn't linear, and that was maybe surprising to me, having been taught as a teenager and as a young adult, like you'll get, pregnancy is, unwanted pregnancies are going to be the hardest thing that you'll wrestle with. And so I just thought, okay, well, that will be easy. We'll just get pregnant as soon as we want. And, I will just get pregnant as soon as I want. And that wasn't the case. And that was a shock, I think, initially, because it really forced me to think about what was this journey that we were going on. I had more time, I think, maybe to wrestle with the idea of becoming a mother and the process of why I wanted that to happen. So my husband and I had been together a long time. And when we started trying for our family, it wasn't happening. So we needed a lot more help, I think, than we had anticipated. And I think that process of being on the side of infertility kind of opened up for me kind of a whole new toolbox of language and vocabulary that I hadn't been exposed to before, and made me a lot more introspective about why motherhood felt important and what kind of motherhood felt important to me. So I think the process of becoming a parent happens in lots of different ways. Mine ended up actually being quite, like, I am a biological parent. I had the gift, I think, of being able to carry and birth my own children, and not everyone reaches parenthood that way. But that process kind of cracked me open, I think. And that process of cracking open, I think, allowed a lot of other things to kind of come to the surface and come out, which, we've talked about this. I wanted to see in a really positive way. I didn't want to see that as a frightening thing. And so I did wrestle that, I think anyone who's sat with infertility or knows someone who's experienced it will know it's a hard thing to have going on in the background of your life, whilst you're also trying to kind of show up in the everyday,
Yeah.
do good work and create and, be there for your friends who are often having, if they're not having maybe similar struggles, maybe having different ones, or are, seem to be kind of popping out babies left, right and center. And, you want to be a good friend. And we all know that it's both and, right? I can be happy for them and sad for myself. But I did have a very traumatic late miscarriage between the two children that we have, that we're so lucky to have. And I think that was a real reset for me. And I think the biggest moment of my journey to motherhood was that process of kind of really understanding what loss felt like and wanting to get back to basics and really ask myself, in that kind of Mary Oliver line, like, what is it that you want from this one wild and precious life? And really focusing on two things, and that was we really wanted a second child, and I allowed myself for the first time to vocalize that I really wanted to write a book. And I'd been writing for a long time, but I'd never really given myself permission to say that's what it is. And so I think that whole kind of catalyst of life and death and the sort of liminal state you find yourself in as a mother, whether you're in the journey of becoming a mother, you're already a mother, you're kind of wherever you are in that process of creating your family. I think there is this kind of liminal state you often find yourself in, and that liminal state plays up in lots of different points of becoming a parent, not least the process of actually giving birth, if that's part of it. And I think that liminal state for me was this real moment of like transition and choosing to step through certain doors and kind of owning things for myself that I had maybe never allowed myself to do before. The process of becoming a mother has also become the process of me becoming a much more creative person. And I think I couldn't have done one without the other. I think I needed to be creative in order to understand how I was going to go on this journey towards motherhood and build my family. But also I think I couldn't have become creative unless I had been in that very incredible act of choosing and building a family with my husband. So they've become so kind of two sides of like the same coin, I think.
I mean, you've just articulated things so beautifully there, and there's so much I want to tap into. I think firstly, this idea of the process of becoming a parent is something that I just want to touch on a little bit, because similarly to you, that experience for me, I think no matter what kind of person I was before, that process, both for my first child and second child, could have never resulted in anything other than me being a totally different version of myself afterwards. And I found that idea really, really difficult, because it's not something we've really told, is it? It's like we're really told the myth that you, like you say, you decide you want children and you have them. And then for a lot of people, there is a lot of real grit, determination and sadness that can be part of the journey to having the family that you dream of and hopefully one day manage to have. But we don't really give much space at all to the fact that leaves you with something different. You're going to be different because of that process, I suppose, even if it's smooth sailing. So I think and honestly, I think I'm 5 years after starting to try for a baby, a little bit more than that. So before my first child. And I think I spent most of that 5 years feeling like that was a really negative change that I'd been through. Like I used to be a version of myself that was gregarious and confident and brave and whatever, like lots of good things. And I feel like I lost a lot of that. But I didn't lose it at all. It just morphed into something different. But I didn't have any language to communicate what that different version of me, or how that version, the pre-child version, was showing up post-children. And so I'm so happy that you're giving such articulate language to that change, and how that change is totally transformative. And for you, while it's been full of, I suppose, moments that have tested you to your limits, moments that you probably felt you wouldn't ever get through, that you still overall managed to see the whole process as being a fundamentally positive is perhaps the wrong word, but a period of growth.
Yes, I think that's exactly it. And I would say I wouldn't wish infertility on anyone. I think it's a cruel and awful thing to have to deal with. And there are lots of different outcomes to people's stories of infertility. I am so lucky to have two of my own children because that's what we really wanted. But like you say, I think for me, it was clearly an essential part of becoming the mother I am today. Whilst I wouldn't want to go through the experiences I had to go through again, I wouldn't willingly walk up to them. I'm grateful that I've had them because they've taught me so much. They've taught me so much about the world I move through, about how many other people's experiences are so similar to mine, that I'm not so alone with the things that I've had to kind of stare down. And I think it did give me a whole wealth of new vocabulary. It also, I think, helped me understand that a lot of the kind of social narratives about becoming a parent and who you become in the process of becoming a parent are still too oversimplified. And I think for a long time there was this sense that you would have children and nothing would change, because in the context of if you were working, you would just go back, right? You would just like go back to your job. And I just think about, like, I mean, even if you had a pretty uncomplicated labor and birth and pregnancy, and, you know, and even if your child is pretty low needs, it's still, I mean, your world has been rocked. How could you possibly go back into something you were doing before? Like, of course we've changed. So I think there was that, and then it shifted. And I think there's a very welcome conversation now about what happens through matrescence, and the fact that we are actually changed on a cellular level, and there are parts of our children that are nestled in our brains and our lungs, and I just think this is like a phenomenal thing. But there's something else I think that we miss in between those two states of, like, I am utterly transformed and I must also go back to how I was before. And I like to think of it as a kind of alchemy. And I think one of the things that stuck with me after the birth of my daughter, my first child, was actually how much of myself I still was. And that was almost surprising, because I'd almost then been receiving this kind of this new narrative of, you will be such a different person, you will be so changed. And to some extent, I didn't want to be completely changed, because I'd also spent a lot of time with myself over the years, and I quite liked who I was. And I didn't want to become this like radically new person necessarily. No. It was not that I didn't want to, I just didn't feel that was like, it was almost like it was an ultimatum. It was like, have a kid and you know, everything, you're unrecognizable. I think there's an alchemy that happens, and I think that's what matrescence does, or any kind of parenthood actually. Even if you've not birthed a child, I think it happens for fathers as well, as it may do for parents who didn't carry their children. I think there is a profound sense of alchemy that occurs when you take on this caring responsibility. And for me, that alchemy was about my most authentic self being able to come to the surface more. She was always there. I didn't change. She was always there. It's just that she came closer to the surface, and I was able to be more with her than maybe I had been before. And that's, I think, the shift that I love to see in other people too. You become a lot more authentic.
One of the things that inspired and moved me actually is the word so much when we spoke about this the first time over that coffee, was the language that you used to describe this process. Like you've just said, alchemy, that it's a process of alchemy, the way that you rebuild yourself. But there's something else that you mentioned before, and that was almost this like cosmic mysticism, this magic almost of all of it, you know. And I think especially when you've been through infertility. So, you know, I think the thing we talked about was, sometimes I look at my second son was born through IVF, and I loved my two boys totally equally, of course. Let's just make that clear in case they ever listen to this one day in the future. Boys, I love you the same. You're brilliant. But there is something in my ability to process mentally my second son, Joachim. To me, he is, sometimes I just can't believe that he's here. Sometimes I look at his little feet and I think, how did you start life in a petri dish? Like, how did the process of you being here happen? It overcame so many odds. There's so many reasons you should not be here today, and then here you are. You know, it's like pure magic to me that he defied every rational kind of thought in my brain about how humans are made, whatever. There is so much of him that is just, I still look at him and think, you are fucking magic, son. Like I just could cry. And it's that process definitely opened my mind to the idea that so much more is possible than I perhaps necessarily thought before. And that possibility sits outside of the systems that we're used to, or we've been socialized to work within, right? One of the biggest struggles I had with infertility, I remember talking to my best friend about it, and she said, the problem is we're such good girls, and we spent all of our school and university and working life thinking if we just worked hard enough to get it right,
And trying for a baby, there's no amount of homework you can do that's going to make that. You're not going to get an A grade for that. And that really I had to think outside of all of these systems that I'd been working and sort of accomplishing in, to think very differently about where does my head go and where does my heart go when I think about the family that I want for myself. And there is something, I mean, I'm not a I was going to say I'm not a spiritual person. I think increasingly I am actually more of a spiritual person. I love a bit of tarot. I've gotten into tarot recently. I'm certainly not a religious person. I don't practice a kind of a particular like faith that requires me to be in a certain place and do certain things. But I come from a household. My parents are both, sort of non-religious, but my mother is a lapsed Catholic, and I think there's always been something like, with respect, a bit witchy about her, and she's heard things, and makes her sound crazy, but yeah, it's the sort of voices, and she comes. I have Irish heritage, and they, a very powerful cultural context of visions and messages being sent from other worlds and that kind of thing. And it's not that I wasn't ever open to it. I just didn't understand maybe how to interact with it. And then the process, I think, of becoming a mother, especially if you give birth, does create, you're suddenly in that liminal space between life and death. And you suddenly realize you've actually created something. You are the science, you are the magic, you are the cosmos. You've made an entire person. And the insanity that child comes out with all their everything assembled, it just blows my mind. I remember then really wanting to kind of almost offer myself up to that kind of cosmic safety net. It felt like I had done everything I could, and I needed to ask the cosmos for help, essentially. And so after I'd had this very traumatic loss, all loss is traumatic. It was very traumatic, and that whole year felt very pockmarked by loss and grief. It was a really challenging year. This was in 2022. And then in the beginning of 2023, I said, right, okay, that's it. Back to basics. We want another baby, and I want to write a book. And that was like me saying, okay, this is it. I'm putting it out there. And within 12 months, both of those things came true. And I just look back and think, that's wild to me that happened. I did everything I could, but I felt like there was something, there was this sort of helping hand. And I remember we also had IVF for our son, just like you. And I remember 2 days before we were due to go in for the embryo transfer, and I went for a run. We were staying in a summer house, and it was beautiful kind of, setting sun and greenery everywhere. And I just, I was so sort of in awe of nature. And I came up the crest of this hill, and this voice said to me, "You're going to have a son." And it was like someone had shouted it across the hills. That's how it sounded to me in my head. And I just remember thinking, okay, it's going to be okay. This is going to be fine. And it's, what is it? I don't know. I don't know what any of this stuff is. None of us do. Yeah. But I love the idea that we're not alone, shuffling around, trying to make sense of it all, that there might be something that we can just get a little guidance and support from. And that's what that feels like, that whole process of creating, whether you're creating literally a child or you're creating some other body of work, is about you sort of offering yourself up a little bit and placing your head and your heart in a place that is not kind of rooted down in the systems that we've built around us that feel very earthbound. I think there's great magic out there if we're willing to open ourselves to it.
So what did that look like for you in terms of your creative journey? So you said, I want to write a book. What happened then?
So when I was on maternity leave with my daughter, I had the idea for the book, and it's born out of the work I do. So I work at IKEA, and I lead this sort of big piece of global research into life at home. And over the years, we've amassed an awful lot of insights about what actually creates a good life at home, but I think more importantly, what creates the feeling of home. And I've always been really interested in that emotional aspect of home. And it was something I was personally really interested in, but professionally was really starting to see sort of enormous opportunity to build more into that space. So I remember walking around the park with my daughter in a stroller, and this sort of idea came to me, and I thought that would make a really interesting book. Just because I was on maternity leave with her, I was writing a proposal. I didn't know I did not know how to get a book published. I knew, broadly speaking, I needed a literary agent, and then I needed to, then it would go to publishing houses. I saw that, but that was kind of it. So I started to write a proposal when I was on maternity leave with her. I pitched it out to a couple of agents, and I got, either like thanks but no thanks, or just, deafening silence. And I went back to work, and I just sort of both literally and metaphorically put it in a drawer. You know, I just kind of was like, okay, I don't know what to do with this. And now life is really busy and I don't know where to go with this. But I couldn't shake the idea. And I think I'm very much of the Elizabeth Gilbert persuasion here, big magic, that when ideas come to you, they keep knocking, you know, they come back and they come back and they come back until you're ready. And if you're truly never ready for it, they'll go to someone else. And I remember thinking, if I don't do it, someone else is going to do this, and that's going to make me really upset. I've got to give it a fair crack. And in that time, the research had moved on enough for me to feel I could come back to it. The puzzle piece, I think, that I hadn't been able to quite place in the first proposal slotted in. And suddenly this idea blossomed and I could really see it. I could almost write it in my head. So I knew then I needed to get a really good proposal together, and I probably needed a bit of help with that. And that's when I decided I'm going to invest in myself. And I paid for a literary consultant, a woman I'd been following, who set up her own sort of boutique agency. I needed someone to hold my hand a little bit. I needed someone to say, here's some red lines on your proposal. Like, this is what you're missing. In order to feel I'd really, you know, gotten as much of the sort of input I could glean. I was like, I just wanted to give it the best crack I can, and if it doesn't go anywhere, I won't sit there going, I wish I'd done this. I wish you know, I've done everything I can. And she was great, and I worked with her over the summer whilst I was having fertility treatment, and every evening we'd put our daughters to bed. We were staying in this little summer house, and I'd go and sit outside in the garden, this beautiful garden that had horses that would come up to the fence and look at me. And a little ginger cat who lived in the farm, and he'd come and like prowl. I was so bucolic, and I would sit there and write for 2 hours. I mean, I took photographs of it because I was like, this is ridiculous. This is
you're giving me, you know what you're giving me? You're giving me Love Actually vibes. You know, in college, he's out in Portugal or wherever he is,
with his typewriter.
Every time I watch that film, I'm like, one time in my life, I need to be in that exact space, doing that exact thing. And you basically did that.
I did that, yeah. That was kind of what happened. And thankfully did not lose my manuscript in a pond and have to jump in.
Very attractive woman helping you amass all the pieces.
So that was my life. It was wonderful. I loved it. And I always thought, you know, again, just take these moments for what they are. What a privilege to be able to do this, to sit with my writing and have time for it in such beautiful settings. And then it was quite a quick plop from that, and things started to happen. I became pregnant, and I was then pitching out my proposal to literary agents. Was very lucky that I got offered representation by an agency that I'd had on my hit list. It really started to feel like the cosmos was going, okay, you know what, you've had a really rough time with it. I'm going to deal out some good cards for you now. And I just remember thinking, no one can be this lucky. Something, you know, it's that whole like waiting for the shoe to drop. But I was very lucky. And then of course I was, as the pregnancy progressed, getting more and more to the point where I was like, Jesus, this might actually happen. Once my agent submitted it to publishing houses, you know, I got the inevitable like laundry list of no thanks, which is a very sobering read. But all you need is one person to say yes. And I found a perfect match in this brilliant editor at Transworld, which is an imprint at Penguin Random House. And by that point, when I was having conversations with her, I think initially I was probably the first conversation, I was 7 months pregnant. And I said, I was like, I'm not going to, you know, I'm going to be honest. And I said, look, just full disclosure, I'm pregnant and I'm having a baby in 2 months' time. And she was cool as anything. And I think that was really wonderful to have her say, not a problem at all. She's like, I work with pregnant authors all the time. And if you know you can do it, I know you can do it. And then I still didn't have the deal by that point. And I was, I think, a week out from my due date, and I was going to be induced. And I was basically in very early labour. I remember sitting on a yoga ball, and she'd come back to me and said, I need you to punch up the proposal. I need you to get some stuff, and I've got to get it through acquisitions. So I was sitting on my laptop, days out from giving birth, basically this is probably overshare, but hey, this is a podcast about motherhood. Definitely with all the early labour symptoms, very, quite strong Braxton Hicks, sitting on this yoga ball, just being like, I got to get this thing. I got to get it sent out because I have no idea what's going to happen on the other side of birth. Yeah. And I remember shipping it off and just being like, right, now I just got to retreat within, and I've got to focus on what's coming next. And like, it's with you now, Cosmos. And I was very lucky. Had a great labour, great birth, helped resolve a lot of trauma. And then about a month later, I got a book deal. And it was just, to me, it was extraordinary that the two things I had asked for less than a year before happened in such a close sort of space of time. And I felt so ready for it. I felt so ready to write this book. And it felt like they needed to come together. The baby and the book needed to happen at the same time. It felt like it was like twins.
Yeah,
you know, it was an inevitability. It was like both of these things will happen. Everyone was like, oh, you're nuts. How are you going to do this at the same time? And I was like, there's no other way. This was the way it was always going to be.
Yeah.
It was a very powerful thing.
There is something really lovely about the conviction that you have in, you just trusted the process so much. I think that's because I think there'll be perhaps a lot of people listening to this who are turned off by the idea of, you know, cosmic sort of guidance, because I think it does sit outside of our, you know, capitalist kind of very rational thinking way of viewing the world, which we're so conditioned to believe in. I think what you offering yourself up to, what it brought you, was a total conviction to trust the process and to back yourself. Like, you wanted to do this and you did it. I mean, ultimately, you could have been given the message that you needed to make edits while you were bouncing on your yoga ball with Braxton Hicks and been like, do you know what? I actually can't right now. I don't need this enough. But you did. You needed it enough. So you pushed through. And I think there is something about when you let go of the control that being the good girl kind of instills in you, that perfectionist A-grade mindset is all about control. And you, in some respects, let go of that. And it gave you a freedom to trust the process more. And I think to follow where the doors were opened for you and you walked into them, and you couldn't necessarily have predicted where those doors might have been had you tried to control every step of the process. And so I think it's really inspiring to hear how whatever your cosmos is, whatever your version of that mindset shift is, because I'm right there with you. Like, I totally believe in some greater force that is supporting us on this journey of life. But if you don't believe in that, if that is a stretch too far, I think if you can find your own cosmos and let it be the thing that gives you freedom to move with intention, to have faith, to back yourself, then that is going to take you somewhere, usually somewhere unexpected.
Exactly. I couldn't put it better myself. I think that's it. Like you say, the idea of something bigger can skew towards that kind of spirituality that can be quite off-putting. And it's quite off-putting, to be honest, people like, for myself included. I think the power that comes from what I found myself doing was that I was fully doing it for myself.
Yeah.
This was a pursuit about my actualization, and that's why it felt so invigorating and possible and expanding for me. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. And maybe that's what, like you say, it's about backing yourself, isn't it? It's about saying not just that we can do hard things, but we can do the things we really want for ourselves and not apologize for that. It also would have been completely fine if I'd said, I can't do this right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I just would have been a different route there, I think. But what I profoundly felt in that moment was I can create in lots of different ways, and I don't need to put labels on that, and I don't need to explain it to anyone, and I don't need to make value out of it, because that's what the working world and capitalist structures and like patriarchal economics teaches us, right? It was about thinking outside of that context, and that felt so liberating, and really kind of giving myself a completely different framework to believe in, and that felt infinite then, because the potential for creative execution is limitless when you think about it that way.
So let's just sort of fast forward a little bit. You've had your baby, you've got your book deal, now you need to write the thing. I'm curious, what did that look like for you? How did you make it happen? What was your writing process in that period?
So I had two principles. The first was I will never blame my son for not being able to write. That felt really important to me. I wouldn't resent him for his needs. He's just a baby. He's going to do baby things. And the other was that any minute spent writing is a win. And I think once I set the ground rules for myself, it made every day feel really energizing, and it really honored the role that I had as both a writer and a mother. So what I felt was I'd created in my own mind, before I did anything, this beautiful balance between saying to myself, when you mother, you're mothering, and that's the time you're spending with your son because he needs you. You're feeding him, playing with him, bathing him, whatever, soothing him. And when he sleeps, that's when you get to be a writer. And I would flip-flop between those two states every single day. In practical terms, it meant that I basically packed my laptop in his nappy bag every single day. So if we were out, and, you know, I've spent a lot of my maternity leave over the summer, so it was, you know, nicer weather, so I could be out. And the minute he was asleep, I would park up, hotspot my laptop and get writing. And I would try and see the funny side. I remember once it took him like an hour and a half to get to sleep or something ludicrous. And, you know, there wasn't much I could do whilst I was walking, and he finally fell asleep when I was in the shopping mall. And I just stopped. I just happened to be outside a florist, and I just stopped outside a florist, like sat at a chair and just was like, right, go, you know. And I had 8 minutes, and then he woke up like 8 minutes later, and I just remember thinking, this is a bloody joke. Like, I'm never going to get this book written. But that was 8 minutes. It's better than nothing, you know, and I chip away. I'm quite organized, and I'm very disciplined, and I've always been, that is my type A good girl personality. I guess, you know, take what you can from that. I had a really clear spreadsheet. I knew exactly how many words I had to do each week. Yeah. I had 5 months essentially from when I signed the deal to submission. I had an editor who was incredibly understanding and said, if you need longer, that's fine. I actually submitted 3 days early in the end, and I was bereft. It was a funny feeling. I was so bereft when I sent it off, because the writing had given me such an extraordinary duality of purpose during this time. And it made me love my days. Because it meant I wasn't doing all of everything. I was doing some of all the bits, and that kind of composition just worked really, really well for me. So that was how I did chip away.
Listening to you talk, it's not the first time it's happened, but I actually can feel myself getting emotional.
I feel emotional thinking about it, actually. And I have to say, I had a lot of people who were like, oh, I can't believe you wrote, you know, and and it's a beautiful, wonderful sentiment when people say to me, I can't believe you wrote a book whilst you were on maternity leave. How did you do that? And I just think, God, I wish you'd had that chance, because it was the single best time of my life. And I'm looking to write a second book now, and I'll have to write it in very different circumstances. I hope I have something that feels as, I don't know, just giving as that process. Well, I hope I have something else. It'll be different because I'm not going to have any more children, but I wish that kind of experience for so many people who want to create, because it was extraordinary. It was the best time. And I look back on it and I think, God, I was so lucky to be able to do it that way.
And I wonder if part of, so I didn't write a book while I was on my second maternity leave, but I did feel that that year that I was, or it wasn't a year, but that period that I was off, without doubt, feels like it was the best time of my life. There is something about the journey that you've been on to get there, to being in it, and just being so damn grateful for, obviously the baby, of course, but all of it. I was just overwhelmed with joy. It had been such a process to get there, and I was just soaking up life in a way that I felt that I hadn't before. And again, it was spring, summertime for me. It was just every time I would see like blossom, I was looking at it in a different way. I was just like, what is going on? Like, I feel drunk almost, you know. It's just like, why is the world so wonderful? And so I can imagine if I also on top of that had an understanding of a different part of me that I, you know, really did have the time actually to explore during that period, and was able to dedicate myself to it, how infinitely kind of wonderful that would have been. Like, I totally get what you're saying about how and why that was so fulfilling for you.
And it bucks against the kind of normative thinking on this, and that almost felt then like a pleasure in itself. There's the line by Cyril Connolly, I'll have to paraphrase it, but it's like, there's no more somber threat to good art than the pram in the hallway. It's just such a snobby, and I get it. You know, I have parents who grew up, I mean, my mother's a writer as well, my dad's an illustrator. I grew up in a very creative household, and I watched them straddle that with, you know, having 2 kids. And I like to think that the presence of my sister and I did not become this like existential threat to their ability to create. It certainly doesn't seem like it. You know, I think the way they live their life is great evidence of that. But otherwise, it just felt like that was the default narrative. You can't possibly create the way that you could have. Now you've got kids, right? Your focus is going to be split. You're going to have no time. You're going to have no space. Those things are true. You have reduced time. You have reduced space. But like I say, it comes back to that alchemy. And there's the alchemy of wanting to create and knowing that it's the best possible time, I think, because you're in this state of extraordinary creation, just in the process of becoming a parent, whether it's for the first time or the second time, and what that means to build and make a family. And also, being a parent is the most creative thing you have to do in the world. You are constantly having to think in extraordinary abstract ways about them and how you relate and the way you show up. I mean, it's just extraordinary creativity. So I think actually there was a kind of a sense of like wanting to prove that Cyril was wrong. There is no more somber threat. Actually, you know what? I think having a pram in the hallway for me kickstarted my creativity, gave me permission to do something more extraordinary than I thought I could.
Would you say it's been a kind of an exponential journey of growth into your creative identity, or do you feel like it plateaued after you you submitted the book? What happened after that?
So I became, like I said, I was bereft. I felt so sad. I thought, what am I going to do if I'm not getting up every? And it felt ridiculous. I've got this incredible baby, and I've got, you know, another child. I've got a beautiful family to like pour my energy and everything into. But I truly felt bereft. So I very quickly decided I didn't want to lose the discipline of writing. That felt like a really important part. I think writing, truly, if you want to become a writer, it's like 90% reading. You have to read an awful lot. That's how you become a good writer. And then it's just a muscle. You have to write and write and write and write and write, even if it's garbage. So showing up every day and putting something on the page was really important to me. So that was when I decided to launch a Substack newsletter, because it gave me my own enforced sort of schedule to write towards, and helps me start to, you know, cultivate some of the ideas around the book, grow a community, and start to reach people with my writing before the book comes out. So I kind of shifted my energy to that, and that's been a really beautiful part of how I've then been able to, I think, keep growing as a writer. And almost now, when I look back at, in the 5 months I was writing the book, when I submitted the proposal, I'd had to write a sample chapter. And I remember coming back to that sample chapter when I kind of got to it in the process of writing, and I wrote the book chronologically, chapter 1 to chapter 8. I had already in that time gone through an extraordinary growth period as a writer, just in the 4 months I'd spent writing, because I was doing it every day. And I ended up rewriting that chapter, and I think making it better. And almost now, I remember doing copy edits for the book earlier this year and thinking, even in the time from when I've submitted to now, the writing that I've been doing, I think I'm even better. I feel like I'm getting better and better and better. And that's a wonderful thing to feel like I'm doing for myself. There's constant growth, right? Because it gives me a lot of satisfaction, and it means I feel very agile with my creativity. As I talked about, I mean, one of the big problems with writing is finding the time to do it. I have to be very disciplined. I write on Monday and Tuesday evenings once my kids have gone to bed. As we all know, the end of a working day, your brain's like leaking out of your ears. That's a really hard time to write. You don't just get to squander hours just, you know, I don't know, coming up with great ideas. You have to be very precise and start getting things on the page that work very quickly. And I feel like I've got a very good, like, I'm gig fit. I feel like I can write to timeline, to word count.
You get in the zone really quick.
I can do that. I can channel it super quickly. And that, I think that's what my creativity looks like at the moment. Like, orientated.
But that's super cool, because do you know what I think? Just as you were talking, it made me think about the episode of apologies to anyone who doesn't watch this and will infinitely judge me. And just like that, the new Sex and the City.
Yeah, no judgment here.
Sorry, I mean, I don't know. I always feel like I need to preface it. But anyway, the latest episode, there's this British guy that lives... Sorry, spoiler alert to anybody who hasn't watched the latest episode. But anyway, there's a British guy who's living below Carrie, and he is a writer, and he's very serious, and his house is a cave, and he locks himself away for 6 months so that he can, you know, do his art. And it's so ridiculous, because I think so many people are just totally put off by this idea of, like, if you have to suffer for your art, or like if it's this, you give up everything, otherwise you can't do it. If you think that, you're never gonna put pen to paper, because what's the point? Like, that's just not...
and it's so male. It's all the stories of, like, you know, the Hemingways and the you know, Osters, and they're just these, like, great novelists of our time who drank 2 bottles of whiskey and locked themselves away for 14 hours and had, you know, wives and girlfriends who did everything else around the home. I read a really transformational book that my husband gave me when I was on leave called The Baby on the Fire Escape. And it's by a woman called Julie Phillips. And it's an exploration of artists who help her understand what she calls the mind baby problem. So it's basically a meditation on like maternal identity and sort of artistic greatness. And she, you know, has people like Alice Neal, Ursula K. Le Guin, and actually the quote, "The Baby on the Fire Escape," is in relation to apparently Alice Neal. She was a painter, and her in-laws once said, well, the only way she could finish that painting was by sticking the baby on the fire escape. And it's brilliant because it's kind of a wandering through the way that these mothers mothered, and in very different and extreme ways. And some of them feel very unrelatable to me, but some, like Ursula K. Le Guin, feel very relatable, that she actually found a real harmony in raising a family and also writing extensively as she did, and with such like world renown. But yeah, it was a helpful corrective, because I think often all we hear about is like, we don't hear about the experiences of mothers mothering and also being artists creating. That it's very seldom do we hear those stories. So there's not that many role models to look to. But increasingly, I would say there are so many writers who I look to and deeply admire today. Someone like Clover Stroud. She has 5 kids. She writes memoir, and she's a prodigious writer. She talked about, she reckons she could pump out a book every 6 months if she didn't have kids. But then what kind of writer would she be? Not necessarily a worse one, but she'd be a different one.
Definitely,
I look to that and think, it's so, not only is it possible to write and also take care of children and mother, and also be in a relationship with your partner, and, you know, all these other things that come into being like a wholehearted person, as Brene Brown would say. I think it actually makes it better. I think that's what that's the narrative I want to see. I think it's not just that you can do it in spite of those things. It's not about creating in spite of the commitments you have, but you can create because of them.
Yes, absolutely. Totally. I almost wish I was creative in a totally different space. I think, because I'd love to complement what you're saying with a different art form, but I, you know, absolutely love to write. And I think one of the things that I really want my children to see is that mum has some passion that is just 'cause, that like she gets lit up by something, that it brings her joy, that she finds playfulness in some form of expression that is literally just 'cause, you know, because I love that. I want my children to feel how it feels when I'm in the flow of something that I love. You know, when you're, for you and for me, writing, for other people it could be anything. It could be pottery, it could be painting, it could be running, whatever it might be. But to have that thing that sits in your body and gives you energy, for me, like I feel that humming in my chest when I'm really in the flow with writing. I almost can't, my fingers, I can't type fast enough. The ideas are coming. It's like, talking of witches, it's almost like, you know, spells coming out of my fingertips. Like I just I can't get it out quick enough. And it's an energy that I don't get from anything else. There's that kind of vibration doesn't come from anything else. And so I want my children to find their version of that, whatever it might be. And you need to model that that's important, that it's not just about your productivity or your efficiency or whatever other markers we say are successful within our world today, but that you can and should and must actually find joy through the inexplicable. And I really want that women and men can teach children that skill. But in order for us to do that, we need to stop making creativity silly. It's not like a silly hobby. It's not we need to take it seriously. Like it's serious that if maybe I'm putting words in your mouth now, but saying out loud, I want to be a writer, I could imagine might have felt a bit like, I don't know, almost you have to say that sheepishly. Like, is that a real thing that you can say these days? Like, will people take that seriously? Will people support that as an actual goal that has value? Because I feel that any time people say, I want to be a musician or I want to be an artist or whatever, it's like, oh, but there's no money in that. You know, that's kind of like the default sort of next reaction. And how much more we would be able to support people to sort of find themselves creatively if we could just be like, that's amazing, you should definitely do that. Because no matter what outcome, if it's sort of,
it brings you joy.
Yes, exactly.
It's worth more than anything you might be able to charge for it, right?
Yeah.
But I think we have there's a bit of a problem I think we have today with people wanting to turn hobbies into kind of hustles, as if like it's only worth it if you can monetize it.
Yeah.
And like you say, it's really important just to do something for the love of it. And of course, like I say this with that's going to be published, and like that's an extraordinary gift of validation for a writer. But having a published book doesn't make me a writer. Me showing up with a blank page every day is the thing that makes me a writer. And there's a very sort of powerful way of thinking about this. So James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, and I mention him in my book actually because he has this idea of habit formation, is really powerful in the context of the home, which my book is all about. And he says that behavior change is actually identity change. And one of the biggest things that you can do is stop saying, I write, is an example. Rather than say, I write, you say, I am a writer. So you become the thing that you want to do, and that you can say those things about yourself without feeling like you have to make it a professional expression. You don't have to validate that. There's, at what point do you become a writer? How many books do you have to publish? Awards do you have to win before you can say, I'm a professional writer? Yeah. I am a writer because I write more days than I don't. And that feels really good for me. But I want to decouple that from this idea of like an occupation as a writer, because I'm also a strategist and a mother and a cook and a cleaner and I do all these other things as well, right? Some of them feel less aspirational to me, but they're still part of how I show up every day. And I try and get as much joy and satisfaction out of them as I can. But that sense of unlocking creativity in your children, there's nothing better than a good example, right? And I got that. Certainly I watched I watched my parents. That's a Freudian slip, isn't it? I watched my parents in their studios when I was growing up, and I would watch them create, and it did feel like a kind of magic to see them in their flow states and know that that was something that gave them extraordinary joy, even if it didn't necessarily always bring in a lot of money, because that was their occupation as well. But it made them real wholehearted people as a result, and a great life lesson for me.
So what would you say to someone who's listening to this that has something burning in them, or some little spark that they want to ignite? What would be the first step of reclaiming or connecting with that creative side of themselves?
It's a great question. I think one of the things that I've become aware of that I think stops, this podcast is about motherhood, right? So sort of really addressing mothers in particular. I think one of the things that stops mothers from giving themselves the opportunity to explore stuff is this idea of mum guilt. And I have no time for mum guilt. It is an insidious social construct. And it makes women feel bad about spending time away from their children, or feel guilty about asking their partners to do something that they may have done otherwise. I think the problem with mum guilt is it conflates love with time, and those are two completely different things. The love I have for my children is infinite. There will always be more love than they could possibly take from me, right? There's never going to be a deficit of love. Yeah. But time is finite. I've only got 24 hours in any given day. And what we need to do is stop conflating those two things and making them an equivalent. We've got to stop making time a proxy for love. And that, again, is a symptom of like late stage capitalism and patriarchal economics that only knows what billable hours look like and cannot measure love. But I think that is at the root. When I look at my peers, whether they're close friends or other women in sort of mothers groups and so on, people bandy around this idea of mum guilt quite a lot. And I hear all too often people who are bright and brilliant and are really motivated to do things stop themselves from giving time back to themselves to do something. I think that would be where I would want to start, is by saying, don't feel like the time you take for yourself to explore something you love or something you need or something that is outside the context of your kids in any way diminishes the total amount of love you have for those kids. Like that's just, and I've never held truck with mum guilt from the get-go. I've always said I just think it takes away so much from people. So I've always been very clear that when I'm writing and I need to write and we've agreed that that's what I'm doing, then that's what I'm doing. And I'm not going to sit there feeling bad about it, because then I can't create. So I think the first thing I would say to anyone who wants to explore their creative side is have that conversation with yourself, but also then have that conversation maybe with your partner. Because of course, if you've got family and you've got kids that need, caretaking, if you're stepping out for a bit, someone else has got to step in, right? And you've got to have that dialogue and make sure everyone's okay about it. That's where I would begin. I would start with time, give yourself time. And then I think it's like, we just talked about this problem again, I think is another challenge of like creativity needing to be valuable in and of itself, that it needs to generate income or some other form of like measurable sort of wealth. And that's not what creativity is about at all. Creativity is a kind of magic that we perform on ourselves that allows us to explore within and without and find completely new colours and textures to who we are and what we like to do, and can be a deeply joyful and often therapeutic process as well. And that's all it needs to be. It doesn't need to be, you don't need to be good at it. I used to go to this still life, or not still life, what's the one where you draw naked people?
Crocky.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if you say it
naked people.
Yeah.
I would draw naked people badly, like really badly, and I would come back and show my husband these like charcoal drawings of naked people, and he'd be like, did they really look like that? I'm like, yes, absolutely, yes, it was that size, I promise. It was so bad, but it was so good to do something that was never gonna, I'm never gonna be a professional drawer. That's fine, it's fine for me. I don't need to be good at it, I just needed to go and do it and use a different part of my brain, and that was a lovely thing. So that's where I would start.
Yeah, I buy into all of that so much. Like, I definitely think alongside the decouple guilt from, or decouple time with love, I think on top of that, remember that you matter. Like, you get to have an hour at the weekend, whatever tiny minuscule thing you're trying to take. Yeah. That's not selfish like that. But by thinking that it's selfish, which I definitely have the tendency to do, what you're really saying is, I don't matter as much as everyone else in this family. Like you minimize your own presence or your own sense of self by always consistently putting everybody else, on the totem pole of needs. And again, it's just not modeling the right things to our children. I don't want them to think that mum doesn't matter. I want them to think that I have value and that my time is precious just as theirs is. But we have to model that. We have to. And doing that sometimes means just putting yourself first. And I wish that wasn't such a difficult thing for a lot of mothers to do, but it is. And the only way around it is to just get uncomfortable and do it. And then just to be like, right, well, I'm here now. I'm going to whatever it is, right, be it the gym, draw, whatever, because I'm here now. So if I don't, then I've wasted it. All right, let's just wrap up this conversation with a bit of a quick fire round. So, right, now it's actually, the task is more on me, not to give a load of spiel after your usually very articulate answers. People always answer really articulately, and then I go off on one. So I'll try and shut up. Right, so what is one word to describe your creativity now?
Expanding.
Don't say anything, Danny. And what's one creative habit or ritual that you really love?
Morning pages, which for anyone who's not familiar is part of the Artist's Way. Julia Cameron wrote this guidebook for creative unblocking, essentially. It's sort of a spiritual path for artists. It's about how to get in touch with your creative side if you're feeling blocked. I've sort of done it on and off. I've never fully done, it's like a 12-week course, you do these tasks, but at the cornerstone is two things. One is morning pages. You wake up, the first thing you do is you write 3 pages of free flow, just out of your brain thinking. And the other is once a week you take an artist's date. So you take some time and you go and do something for yourself. Could be, I don't know, you just go and have a hot chocolate somewhere or go to a gallery. It's not convoluted, but the morning pages has been transformational for me. And I thought, I'm never going to be able to do this because I've got kids who wake up at, butt crack of dawn. How am I supposed to get up and do this? But I've made it work. I get up just before they do and I write as much as I can for 3 pages. And it is therapy on a page. And I think so much of the agility I found, we talked about, this agility with my writing, the muscle that I use to write and the focus and clarity I have when I have ideas, I can get them on the page quickly, is because every morning I just empty out the contents of my brain and it empties the pipes.
Yeah, exactly. sort of kickstarts the engine. You're ready then for a day.
So morning pages, highly recommend.
This is a little bit touching on what you just mentioned now, but is there a specific book that really lit something up in you?
Yeah, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. I think that idea of like where ideas come from and the creative potential of all of us is very powerful. So I recommend that to pretty much anyone.
And lastly, what's the sign that you really take as the signal that you're in creative flow?
I think it's when I can't avoid writing. Like if it's a very visceral feeling. It almost hurts. Like if I'm in the middle of doing other things and it's come to me, I have to go and do it.
Yeah.
And I try and be much more flexible with that now when I allow that feeling to guide my day a bit more, which is tough when you've got a full-time job and kids and whatever. You can't just park things left, right and centre. But that's when I know, okay, the creativity is calling. It's knocking on the door. I'm going to let it in. I'm not going to push it away.
Do you have any tactics or whatever so you don't lose the thought? Like, do you have a notes in your phone or a little notebook or anything?
Exactly, just literally that.
Just
if I'm
jot
out
it
and
down.
about, I just jot it down. Yeah, send myself an email, write it on notes. That's usually how I get the core of it down. Yeah.
My notes on my phone is the most unhinged place on earth,
me
honestly.
too.
If I like ever die and someone looks in my notes, they'll be like, "What is it? This girl was over the place." Literally, it is exactly that. It's like goes from toilet paper to some deep, meaningful exploration of the self.
All the best notes are.
Katie, thank you so much. I know your book's not out yet. What's the process of that? Like, where can people find out more?
You can pre-order it. I need to find a pithy way to say this, but with all your best retailers, I have a UK publisher, so you can pre-order it on Amazon.co.uk or Waterstones. If you just type in Katie McCrory and Where the Heart Is, that should come up, so you can already buy it. It doesn't have a front cover yet, to be revealed. That's coming soon. So that's where you can find the book. And then you can also find me on Substack. And I would love people to subscribe. It's free, you don't have to pay for it. And that is lifeathome.substack.com. And you'll get a weekly newsletter from me.
And when is the book going to be out in the world?
February 19th, 2026.
Ooh.
So a spring baby.
Yay.
My book baby. Yeah, coming. So
fantastic.
It feels way off, but it will come up quick.
Oh, thank you so much. Honestly, I
thank you, Danny.
just have loved this so much. Yeah, I really, really, really love the way that you put language so articulately to this whole process of, connecting with yourself creatively and just finding your rhythm in creativity as well, and finding what works for you, and then really backing yourself.
Thank you. It really means a lot.
Well, it's true. And I know that you're I really see you at the beginning of quite an amazing journey. I think one day in whatever, I don't want to put timeline on it, but someone will be saying, is there a book that lit you up? And someone will be like, oh yeah, I read this amazing book by Katie McCrory. And then people will be on their way to go and find out what amazing things you had to share to the world. So
that's so kind. Well, then they'll point to our book about how to make friends as adults, right?
Exactly.
Obviously, we'll get that written in the world.
Yes, definitely.
But this was such a joy and a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.